I have the great honor and pleasure of chairing our first panel, provocatively titled, "Do we need a legally binding climate treaty for business to invest and scale up low-carbon solutions?" And we have an absolutely outstanding panel to address this important topic. We have Mr. Arunavo Mukerjee, Vice President in charge of climate change at Tata Group and a member of the Caring for Climate Steering Committee of the UN Global Compact. We have Ms. Rachel Kyte, Vice President of Business Advisory Services and member of the management group of the IFC. We have Ms. Barbara Cooks, Chief Sustainability Officer at Siemens and a member of the management board, and she's also on the board of INSEAD and a World Economic Forum global leader of tomorrow. We have Mr. Daniel Servitje, the Chief Executive Officer of Grupo Bimbo and a board member of Coca-Cola FEMSA, Banamex, and the Grocery Manufacturers Association of the US. And we have Dr. Claus Conzelmann, Vice President and Head of Health, Safety, and Environmental Sustainability at Nestle. I'm going to begin just taking a few minutes to set the stage for our topic, and then I'll turn it over to each of our panelists to make some opening remarks. And then we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes for dialogue amongst the panelists, and then I'll turn it over to the audience for questions. So start thinking of your difficult, provocative questions now, because we hope to have a very lively and interactive discussion. Just a few remarks to set the context. As we heard from our previous speakers this morning, it's very easy to see Copenhagen as a failure. The objective was an ambitious, legally binding agreement, and we didn't get it. Also, the process chaos and the sounds of discord make it easy to dismiss the outcome in Copenhagen. But perhaps that was too simplistic a view, that perhaps another way to view Copenhagen is it was the end of one era of global climate cooperation and perhaps the beginning of another era. And the era that arguably ended was what could be called the Rio Dream, the dream of 1992, that faced with an existential threat, the world would come together as a community, dispassionately review the best science, and then respond to that science with international legal instruments. And for a while, that Rio Dream seemed to be working. The UN Convention was signed by 192 countries, and it's still today a landmark statement of international cooperation. The IPCC delivered an increasingly dire set of scientific reports, and despite the absence of the US at the end, the Kyoto Protocol did come into force. And in Bali in 2008, the world agreed to reach a new treaty by Copenhagen. And the period from Bali to Copenhagen, we should remember, it was actually a very productive period, maybe even a high watermark for this Rio Dream. Climate change went from being a narrow environmental issue to being a head of state issue, a world leaders issue. And it went from the government affairs or corporate social responsibility departments in most companies to being a CEO and board level issue. And it was discussed intensively in cabinet rooms and boardrooms and countless summit meetings. And it went from the back pages of the newspapers to the front pages. And the fact that 134 world leaders actually turned up in Copenhagen, the largest gathering of world leaders in history, that itself was probably the biggest success of Copenhagen. And while the accord is a political statement, it's not a treaty, it did show a degree of consensus that arguably didn't exist before Bali. So why then did this Rio Dream in the final days and final weeks of Copenhagen fail? Well, if one looks at the long history of international cooperation and legally binding treaties, that legally binding treaties tend to come at the end of a period of cooperation and trust, rather than at the beginning. And that cooperation has to be seen as being self-interested cooperation. There was a long history of trade before GATT and WTO became into being. The law of the sea merely formalized many existing practices, and the EU was founded on a big base of post-war cooperation. Sovereign states don't pool their sovereignty very easily. It often has to be formalizing existing trust and cooperation, and what Copenhagen showed was that trust and cooperation was not there. And this was also happening against a backdrop of tectonic shifts in the world order with the rise of new emerging powers and developed powers in deep financial crisis, And the frictions of this shift also added to the atmosphere of mistrust and perceived national interests trumping human interests. So what does this mean for the post-Copenhagen world? What does it mean for Cancun? Well, unfortunately, few believe that a full, comprehensive, legally binding treaty will be achieved in Cancun or any time soon. The divisions are simply too deep, and the negotiations, the process of the negotiations, remain difficult. Nonetheless, Secretary Elvira and our hosts here in Mexico have been doing an absolutely outstanding job of trying to get the most out of Cancun that is possible, and there is a reasonable chance that what's being called a balanced package of progress will be made in a number of areas. But the world hasn't stopped because of the negotiations, and that's what we want to discuss on this panel. With a few exceptions, the world is moving. The EU is debating whether to unilaterally increase its target. China will produce a 12th five-year plan with probably higher targets. India and Brazil are moving on national plans, and countries such as South Korea and South Africa are taking some bold steps. And likewise, business is moving too. Companies are continuing to invest, innovate, and develop new products and services, and increasingly equate low carbon with higher opportunity. So one can start to see a stew of bottom-up activity happening around the world. And we must be clear that this bottom-up activity is not moving nearly fast enough, at least as fast as the science says we need to move. And we need to think about how we can connect this bottom-up activity with the top-down activity of the international negotiations. But let's be clear, business is absolutely at the heart of this bottom-up regime, of this bottom-up cooperation, trust building, and real action. And so now we turn to our panel for the big questions. Does business need a global deal? Can business drive ahead without one? If we don't have a global deal, what can business do to help this bottom-up regime of cooperation succeed? And if we do need a global deal, what exactly do we need from it? And what do businesses need to do differently in this post-Copenhagen world? So I'll now start with you, Arunavo, to open up with comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. First, I would like to thank UN Global Compact, UNEP, and organizers of this event for giving Tata a chance to speak here and present our views. A brief introduction to Tata. It's a 140-year-old group with 100-odd companies and operating across the world with US $70 billion in revenues. Tata vision is leadership with trust. Given this background, we take pride in the fact that Tata Group is totally convinced of the importance of combating climate change with the help of people like you in the audience today. We set up a dedicated group in 2008 to measure the carbon footprint, identify abatement measures, develop abatement cost curves, and finally chart a low-carbon growth path for our companies. We have a pool of 150 climate change champions across Tata companies who have carried out the above exercise in 35 companies. A key learning of this initiative has been that what is good for the climate is also good for business. We are also supporting the government of India in their low carbon, in devising a low carbon growth path for the country. And similarly in other geographies where we have large investments, notably UK, where we are working with the Confederation of British Industries. However, it would be futile to think that the threat of climate change has been accepted all over India, and indeed, whether it has been accepted all over the world also. I'm coming here on this subject. I'm coming here after attending a 2-day symposium on this subject at the University of California at Berkeley, where I learned various reasons like the climate gate and loss of jobs have led to dropping of public opinion on climate change. Thus, at this juncture, it is very important that we as businessmen reach out to all stakeholders and enlist their support in this vital battle for survival of life as we know it is today. The governments, both national and across the globe, are a key stakeholder given their role in enacting legislation. Many of the renewable technologies are more expensive than fossil fuel ones. To be able to fund these projects, government support is required in various forms, such as government-backed long-term contracts, incentives for a defined period for renewable energy, improved infrastructure like extending the grid for evacuating renewable power, infrastructure for things like district cooling, and also facilitating local acceptance of what is often recognized as nationally important projects for combating climate change. We often find that the permitting process in the local area itself becomes a very time-consuming affair. Thus, to conclude from a Tata perspective, although we will push ahead in combating climate change, since we believe it is the right thing to do, under wider acceptance would require strong signals from the governments across the globe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mukerjee. I'll now turn it over to Ms. Rachel Kyte.
Thank you. Does the business community need Cancun? No. The degree of innovation, and you mentioned, I thought it was interesting, Eric, in your introduction, you mentioned a number of middle-income countries, and I think where we're looking at investment opportunities in emerging markets, the innovation, the dynamism, and the vision, especially in middle-income countries, is really quite remarkable and very different from 3, 4, 5 years ago. And so, no, there's a lot happening. It's bottom-up. It's in some sectors more than others. It's in pockets, in different regions within some of these middle-income countries. It's also happening in some of the low-income countries as well. But what the business community needs from Cancun is something that helps that go faster, go scalable, replicable, and really start locking in all of the sectors of the economy towards a resource-efficient future. So it doesn't take very much. A signal from the Kenyan government around feed-in tariffs suddenly brings a lot of investor attention, a lot of innovator attention. You know, we've been working on the market for renewable solar-powered LED lighting for the poor, the base of the pyramid, this massive market of 1.6 billion people who don't have access to electricity and so need off-grid and mini-grid solutions. And, you know, in the space of a few years, the cost of that LED lighting, also now with the phone charger attached to it, has gone from, you know, $30 a unit down to 10 and below, which is a win-win, big market opportunity for global innovators and global producers, big win for Kenya, suddenly start to move on that path towards lower carbon growth, to resource-efficient growth, and is a big win politically, because that deal that was out of reach in Copenhagen is out of reach in Cancun or in South Africa or on any point further on, if we cannot sell the notion that climate change on the one hand is necessary and mitigation is important for those who have emitted too much in the past, but that deal has to be a pro-poor deal. That deal has to be a deal that allows the poor to have the right to their aspiration for power, for opportunities, for jobs, etc. And I think that the innovation of business, therefore, is not only important in terms of, look, we can sequester this amount of GHG, we can avoid this amount of GHG in the large industrial economies. It's so important in terms of revealing to government in poor countries, revealing to people in poor countries that their needs will be met in a reasonable time frame through clean, green solutions, and that we aren't sort of saying that we're prioritising our fear over climate change over their aspirations. So, no, lots happening, but Cancun is so important in terms of being able to scale those solutions by providing smart regulation, smart attention from government to what the private sector can bring.